You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. And on today's episode of the podcast, we're reviewing the first test between New Zealand and Australia from the Basin Reserve in Wellington. And, a convincing, dominant performance by Australia, a crushing defeat for New Zealand in this first test match. Australia continue their dominance over New Zealand in test matches. Cameron Green played a career-defining innings. Nathan Lyon showed us why he's one of the best off-spinners in the world and showed his class in this test match. And Green and Lyon guiding Australia to a very comprehensive victory. On the other hand, for New Zealand, the home side, yet again, the hoodoo against Australia continues in test matches. Some poor batting, some poor tactics with the ball, and some missed opportunities has cost New Zealand dearly in this test match. And that's why they lost this test match by a very convincing margin of over 170 runs. So plenty for the home side to ponder about going into the second test in Christchurch, which is not far away. But pretty much Australia showing their class and dominance over New Zealand. And unfortunately for New Zealand, yet again, their hoodoo against Australia continues in test matches and wasn't one of New Zealand's best performances, it has to be said. So plenty to discuss, to talk about in this review of the first test between New Zealand and Australia. And we'll talk about how both teams went about their business and where to next going forward, to the second test, which is in Christchurch at the Hagley Oval for this last test of this series. But before we do all that, let's have a look how the match panned out in terms of the match summary. And let's have a look at how this test match developed over the 4 days. Australia batted first after New Zealand won the toss, chose to bowl first. Australia batted first, made 383 all out in their first innings. Cameron Green top scored with 174 not out. Matt Henry took 5 wickets for New Zealand. New Zealand, in reply, were bowled out for 179. Glenn Phillips top scored with 71. Nathan Lyon took 4 wickets for Australia. Australia, in their second innings, were bowled out for 164. Nathan Lyon, who would have thought Nathan Lyon, the night watchman, top scored with 41. And Glenn Phillips, the part-time off-spinner, took 5 wickets for New Zealand. New Zealand needed 369 runs to win, which was going to be a difficult run chase, and they were bowled out for 196 in the end. Rachin Ravinder top scored with 59, and Nathan Lyon taking 6 wickets for Australia. Australia won by 172 runs, and Cameron Green, no surprise, he was named player of the match for his 174 not out. And that's the match summary from the first test at the Basin Reserve between New Zealand and Australia. What were the key moments and the key factors from the first test between New Zealand and Australia from the Basin Reserve? Well, there was only one key moment and key factor that decided this test match, and that was Cameron Green's 174 not out, plus the 10th wicket partnership of 116 between Green and Hazelwood in Australia's first innings was key to help Australia post that 383 score in the first innings. After they started day 2 at 9 for 279, and that partnership pretty much proved to be the deciding factor in this test match. And that's where the game turned in Australia's favour, and that's where New Zealand were chasing the game from then on in. So that pretty much was the key moment and the key factor that decided this test match in Australia. So those were the key moments and the key factors from the first test between New Zealand and Australia from the Basin Reserve. Well, let's talk about how both New Zealand and Australia performed in this first test match at the Basin Reserve. Let's start with the home side, New Zealand, and talk about their performance overall in this test match. And first of all, let's start off with the batting. Let's talk about the batters from New Zealand and talk about their performance in this first test. Let's be honest, New Zealand's batting was very poor, very dismal. Many New Zealand fans have described the batting from New Zealand with some other words, which are quite colourful, but we won't repeat those words here on this episode because it is a family program, the podcast after all. But New Zealand fans weren't happy with the batting, let's just say that, and they expressed their frustrations. Pretty much for New Zealand, the batting, as I said, was very poor. When you get bowled out for 179, 196, under 200 in 2 innings of the match, it just indicates how poorly they batted. They struggled against Australia's bowlers on a pitch that did a bit up and down, bit of movement in the air with some swing and some seam at times as well, and a bit of spin as Nathan Lyon came into the game in the second innings. And they just lacked doing the basics well. They lacked partnerships. There was some poor shot selection, poor execution, and they lacked a bit of fight with the bat as well. And that showed in the second innings, big time for New Zealand. Going into day 4, they were chasing 369. Yes, that was always going to be difficult, but at least show some fight and some resilience and resolve with the bat. Unfortunately, they had a batting collapse, I should say, 7 for 85 and 17.1 overs. And that indicated how New Zealand had been batting in this test match. It was pretty poor. Once Australia got a few early wickets on day 4, then the collapse started to happen. Once Rachin Ravinder got out, then the rest followed like a stack of dominoes falling over one over the other. So it was pretty poor, the bottom line, pretty poor with their batting. Didn't show much fight. Got bowled out before lunch on day 4. Even though they weren't going to chase down the runs, they weren't going to win, at least show some resolve and some fight and try and eke it out as long as you can, maybe after lunch or maybe to tea, frustrate Australia a little bit. They didn't quite do that. And it was pretty poor from New Zealand. Obviously, Kane Williamson got run out in the first innings. That was pretty much his own fault and error in terms of that run out. There was never a run in that. He just wanted to get off the mark and get off the duck. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. Collided into Mitchell Starc and Will Young. And then Marnus Labuschagne threw down the stumps. And as he always does, Labuschagne, he always hits. And Williamson was gone for a duck run out in the first innings. Pretty much summed up New Zealand's day on day 2 when that happened. And their batting across the board in this test match. It wasn't at their best. They can be better, New Zealand. But up against this Australian attack, they struggled to just get some fluency and rhythm into their batting. There were a lot of starts. Not a lot of batters went on. There were a couple of 50s. Rachin Ravinder in the second innings, 59. And then you had Glenn Phillips in the first innings, 71. Pretty much those innings were, pretty much Rachin and Glenn Phillips, pretty much the only 2 New Zealand batters who batted well across the 2 innings of this test match, whereas everyone else struggled. Also for New Zealand, the tail enders were poor as well. Matt Henry scored some runs in the first innings. He's got 42. Kugelin got 26 in the second innings. But across the board with the tail enders for New Zealand, they didn't show enough application with the bat, especially Tim Southee being captain. Both innings he made 1 and 7, but in the second innings, his dismissal where he just slogged out really and hit it straight to Mitchell Starc on the long on boundary. Got out for 7, pretty much summed up how the New Zealand tail went about things. Could have, stayed in for a bit longer, could have applied themselves, just to prolong the second innings for New Zealand. But unfortunately, once Australia got into the tail, it was pretty much the end of the road for New Zealand. So that was a bit disappointing for New Zealand as well. They could have taken a leaf out of Josh Hazlewood's book and seen what he did with Cameron Green, just to stick it out and just show a bit of application and not throw away your wickets just because you're a tail ender. Tim Southee, he's capable. Tim Southee's probably in the top 10 leading 6 hitters in Test cricket. So, he can hold a bat. He's got a few Test 50s, I think. But really could have done better. So, plenty of areas that New Zealand have concerns about with their batting in terms of all those aspects, as I mentioned. But the bottom line was they weren't quite good enough. And that pressure by Australia and the bowlers really tested them, and they weren't able to overcome that, unfortunately. And top order failed, middle order scored some runs but weren't really effective. The tail enders were disappointing. So across the board, really plenty of questions for the New Zealand batting lineup to ask themselves, really going into the second test, because it was a pretty poor performance. So that's the batting. Let's talk about the bowling and how New Zealand performed in that department in this test match. Pretty much with the bowling, New Zealand, the bowling was a bit up and down. It was a bit inconsistent. They missed golden opportunities with the ball across this test match. Now, they had Australia 9 for 267 in the first innings. And after winning the toss, choosing to bowl first on day one, if they bowled Australia out for under 300, would have been a great result. Unfortunately, enter Cameron Green's innings and Josh Hazlewood's partnership, 10th wicket partnership of 116, got Australia up to 383, nearly towards 400. And that's where New Zealand lost this test match. They missed a golden opportunity there with the ball. The tactics were wrong to Green and Hazlewood. The tactics were all over the place. And you would think Tim Southee, as a bowling captain, should know better when it comes to bowling to the tail and the tactics when it's down to the tail and how to deal with that. They didn't create enough pressure to Cameron Green to play a big shot or to really have that urgency to get off strike, to get, out to the other end for the next over. They didn't change the field around. They kept the field back for Green to give him an easy single. But Cameron Green wasn't buying that. They didn't really make Cameron Green do something that he didn't want to do. Didn't really have the field up to put him under some sort of pressure. Yes, they had to slow the runs down in some aspect, but also you got to try and get him out as well. And then Josh Hazlewood was allowed to, face a couple of balls and over, or maybe one ball and over, which pretty much frustrated New Zealand and frustrated them on day two when they were, when they were, under the pump. Poor tactics from New Zealand with the bowling side of things, especially to Green and Hazlewood. They could have done a lot better there. That was a golden opportunity missed and really cost them dearly. Better tactics could have been a lot different. So a lot of people did mention that about the tactics there. They could have been better, especially to Green and Hazlewood. In terms of the second innings, they bowled really well in the second innings, New Zealand. Australia were bowled out for 164. That was a good result for New Zealand, but the damage was already done. Australia had a 204-run lead going into the second innings. In the end, set New Zealand 369 to try and win. So the damage was already done, and it was a little bit too late from New Zealand's point of view to bowl Australia out for 164. But regardless of that, Glenn Phillips, the part-time off-spinner, has certainly improved his credentials with the ball. Took 5 wickets for 45. New Zealand didn't pick a specialist spinner. They left out Mitchell Satner. So definitely Glenn Phillips is sort of becoming sort of a batting all-rounder, you would think. He's really improved his bowling from all reports that he works hard on it. You'll have to say some of the wickets he got, he earned them, but other wickets he probably was given as gifts by the Australian batters, it has to be said. So he bowled pretty well. Matt Henry bowled well for his fifer in the first innings. Tim Southee and Kugelin were inconsistent. Will O'Rourke, up until he got injured, he bowled pretty well in his second test match in his career. So the New Zealand bowlers missed opportunities and didn't really grasp them. And you can't be doing that to great sides like Australia. Good sides, good teams. You can't be giving them opportunities and let them off the hook. Now, Australia in their first innings, if we go back early on to the innings, they were 4 for 89. So Australia were 4 down for 89. And then that partnership between Green and Marsh for the 5th wicket, 67 they put on, that was a golden opportunity missed by New Zealand. If they picked up a couple of wickets, Australia could have been 6 for 100 odd. But Green and Marsh changed the momentum of the match. That partnership really got Australia back going in the right direction. And then obviously the Green and Hazlewood partnership for the 10th wicket cost New Zealand dearly. So you can't be missing these opportunities. And New Zealand can't do that against Australia. You can't be throwing away golden opportunities through to the keeper and not grasping them. And New Zealand, they'll look back on this test match and say, you know what, we had Australia 4 for 89. Could have been a lot different if we took another couple of wickets there. We had them 9 down for 267 when Green and Hazlewood came together at the crease. That could have been under 300 we could have bowled Australia out for. So they missed opportunities, New Zealand. That's the bottom line. And they didn't grasp them. In Test cricket, against good opposition like Australia, they're not going to give you too many good opportunities to really make them pay. So for New Zealand, they just, didn't grab those opportunities. And that's the frustrating factor for them, is that what if these opportunities were taken? What if this happened? In hindsight, it could have been a different result, but they didn't. And in the end, Australia won this test match quite convincingly. So for New Zealand, with the bowling side of things, they definitely need to have a bit of a rethink going into the second test in Christchurch, think about the plans and the tactics, especially to the tail enders, and especially about making sure they take opportunities, because Australia, they gave New Zealand a couple of opportunities in this test match, and they weren't able to grasp and take those opportunities. So for New Zealand, they've got to remind themselves that as a bowling unit, we've got to make sure we take those opportunities when they come. It's not every day that Australia will give you chances like they did in this test match. So you really got to make it count. So plenty of work for the New Zealand bowlers to do. And just to finish up about New Zealand, it was a pretty poor performance, really. The bowling was good and bad at times. The batting was very bad across the two innings. Very substandard, below their best. So plenty of work for New Zealand to do going into the second test. They got to try and pick themselves up if they can. It's not going to be easy because Australia will come even harder now. Obviously, Australia leading 1-0. They want to win this series 2-0 and win the series outright. So for New Zealand, it's definitely an uphill battle for them going into the second test. So they've got to try and learn from this test match and try and reflect on this performance, because it wasn't their best performance, I should say, and plenty of work for them to do. So that's New Zealand. And let's talk about Australia and talk about their performance across the test match with bat and ball. We'll start with the batting group. Let's talk about the batters for Australia and their performance in this test match. Australia's batting still not at 100%. There's still a lot of question marks with the top order and many other things as well with the batting for Australia, but not quite at 100%. The batting's not quite firing, but they did enough to get the job done. Let's talk about Cameron Green's innings. 174 not out was the difference. His innings plus the partnership with Hazlewood, 10th wicket partnership with Josh Hazlewood, 116, pretty much rescued Australia from 9 for 267 to 383, which was a very good total on this surface in Wellington. That did a bit. Without that, and without the extras that New Zealand bowled as well, Australia could have been under 300 in terms of their innings score in the first innings. But, Cameron Green really stood up. Let's talk about him. Career-defining innings probably for Cameron Green. I think he looked much better in this innings. You can see the confidence as he progressed throughout his innings. You could see the confidence grow and grow. And I think the turning point for him in this innings was the partnership with Mitchell Marsh. Now, Australia were 4 down for 89 when Cameron Green and Mitchell Marsh came together for the 5th wicket. They added 67 for the 5th wicket. And I think that was the turning point for Green in his innings. He saw Mitchell Marsh playing the way that he does. Obviously, Mitchell Marsh being aggressive, looking to play his shots. And I think that was the turning point. I think that was the catalyst for Green to say, you know what? Yes, we're 4 down for 89. We're in a bit of a jam here. The only way that we're going to get out of it is do a bit of a counter-attacking resurgence sort of innings here. I might as well just go and play my shots and see what happens. If it comes off, it comes off. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And I think that's the moment that Cameron Green got going in his innings. And from then on in, you could see the confidence grow in Green. Obviously, coming off a Sheffield Shield 100 for WA recently, going into this series against New Zealand, has certainly proved dividends for him. to be in that sort of form, to have that confidence. It was fantastic to see. To see him stand up, and I thought he batted superbly. Hopefully he can build off this. This will be a career-defining moment for Green, and often that is with a young player. Whenever you score a big century as a young player, it can often be a career-defining moment for you in your career. So hopefully for Green, a match-winning century, a big 100 that got Australia this victory. Also the partnership with Hazlewood, I thought he batted well in the partnership, Green. I thought he handled it well. Brilliant sort of tactics batting with the tail there from Green, especially to Hazlewood. And Hazlewood fed off that confidence and got 22 crucial runs in that partnership of 116. So he handled that well. And Australia's batting, not quite firing, but Australia tend to do this. Whenever they're not firing with the bat or the ball, someone stands up and puts in an extra performance here and there. And that's what Cameron Green did with the bat. Which was good from his point of view. So Cameron Green's superb knock, match-winning century, and a match-winning partnership with Hazlewood for the 10th wicket. In terms of the top order woes continues. Smith, Khawaja and Labuschagne had a mixed bag in this test match. Smith made 31 and then got out for a duck. Khawaja 33 and 28. Labuschagne, his form slump continues, 1 and 2. So definitely Australia's top order, definitely not firing at the moment. And they'll definitely be looking back on this performance and saying, what can we do better? In terms of, Steve Smith, Usman Khawaja, that it's only a brand new opening partnership. They haven't opened the batting for a long period of time. They've only opened in 3 test matches now, 2 against the West Indies and now this one against New Zealand. They added 61 for the first wicket in the first innings. So it was a good partnership. When the conditions were tough, New Zealand were bowling really well. The ball was doing a bit on a surface that had a bit of green tinge about it. You could say they could, improve their proactiveness in terms of putting pressure back on the bowlers and sort of not really dig themselves into a hole, which puts pressure on the other batters coming in, Labuschagne and then Green, etc. Obviously, without David Warner, that's sort of the thing that's missing from Australia is that, bit of an aggressive approach at the top of the order. But we know with Khawaja, that's not his game. We know with Smith, he can do it, but he tends to, go into his methods and go through the gears. So maybe something for Australia to look at. Maybe Smith and Khawaja will talk about that. Maybe be a bit more proactive with the opening partnership and look to put pressure back on the bowlers early on. Marnus Labuschagne being in the talking point of late in terms of his form slump. He's under the pump. Many people questioning about his spot. But I think for Marnus, I think for him, I think he's just overthinking things, I think. I think when I look at Marnus, and I see him bat, I think he's just worrying about getting out. Often when you're in a form slump, you don't want to get out because you don't want to get out for another low score. Otherwise, the pressure builds and mounts and people will be on your back, as it has been for him in his form slump of late. And people, fans and the media are certainly mounting pressure on him. So I think for Labuschagne, I think every time I see him bat, he's a bit tentative. He doesn't want to get out. He's not putting away bad deliveries. There's some half volleys that were bowled to him in this innings and across the 2 innings, and he didn't put them away. Also, he was caught down the leg side as well in this test match, which is a concern. He's been caught down the leg side a few times of late, Labuschagne. I think in the West Indies series, in the Pakistan series this Australian summer, he was caught down the leg side, I think in Melbourne. Yes, he was. So that's a concern as well, a little bit. So he's getting out in similar fashions, which is a concern and something that needs to be addressed. And no doubt he'll be looking at that and saying, I need to tighten that up a bit. But I think for Marnus, I think it's just about, not overthinking things. I think go out there and just bat. Go out there, see the ball, react to the ball, and play accordingly to the line and length, to what the ball's doing. Either you go forward or back, you attack or defend. I think for Marnus, it's just about keeping it simple. Just don't overcomplicate it. And I think that's what he's doing at the moment. He's tinkering a few things with his technique. Often when you're out of form, you can do that because you feel like I need to change something to change the fortunes. But I think what people forget is to go back to keeping it simple. The old KISS principle, which is keep it simple, stupid. In the case of Marnus Labuschagne, what has he done to be successful early on in his career? You know, he's about to play his 50th test match in the next test. He's averaging 50, which is a pretty good record. So he hasn't lost his form. You know, he hasn't lost his skills or his talent overnight. He's still a talented, skillful player. We all know that. He's just going through a bit of a patch, which happens to many of the game's great players. You could say barring Don Bradman, but all of the other players in the game's history, all the great players find a way to get through it. And you're not going to be in form 100% of the time. And I think that's the thing, is that what people expect from players in cricket is that you've got to be 100% in form all the time. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. There's no such thing as being 100% in form all the time or 100% performance, because you're not going to perform at 100%. But what you need to try and do is try and, you know, perform at a certain level that can get the job done for your team, and you execute your skills and do your role. And for Labuschagne, you know, at the moment, he needs to try and work that out. No doubt, I think he will. You know, he's a deep thinker on the game. He's a cricket tragic, as we know. I think he'll think deeply about this. And I think a good thing for him is that Australia, after this test match series against New Zealand, they have a bit of a break from test matches. They don't play until the Australian summer against India, which is at the end of the year. So obviously for Labuschagne, he'll play a bit of county cricket as he does for Glenn Morgan in that time, and think about where he needs to improve on. So I think for Labuschagne, I think he can turn it around. It's just that he needs to get through it. And that's often the difficult thing. Just get through it. Keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate things. Don't fear getting out. That's a part and parcel of the game as a batter. You are going to get out. Bowlers are going to bowl you good deliveries. That's just the way it goes. But, you know, always remember to keep it simple. Go out there, see the ball, react to it, and play accordingly to it. And I think for Labuschagne, he's just overthinking things at this moment because he's in this form slump, and he's just overthinking things. Keep it simple. And if you keep it simple, look to be positive, look to score, things can turn around pretty quickly. And let's hope it can for Labuschagne. Travis Head, Mitchell Marsh had some indifferent test matches. Mitchell Marsh got 40 in the first innings and got a duck in the second innings after getting out to Glenn Phillips, playing with hard hands against the spin, which was his downfall, prodding forward on the front foot, hard hands, and an easy catch for short leg. Travis Head, indifferent in this test match as well. The first innings he nicked off to Will O'Rourke for one, caught by Blundell. And in the second innings, he batted pretty well. Head, he was on 29. He was looking to, you know, up the ante for Australia and get the lead over 400. And then he, you know, played a big shot off Phillips and got caught at long on, which brought about his downfall. He got caught by Kugelan at long on. Glenn Phillips took another wicket in his fifer. So, yeah, Travis Head and Mitchell Marsh, what we expect from them is they're going to be a bit hit or miss. That's just the way it goes with Head and Marsh in terms of their different mindset now. So they are going to be a bit hit or miss here and there. So they'll definitely look on this performance and say we could have done better. Alex Carey, the same as well. The second innings dismissal when he was looking to drive through the covers, he picked out Williamson, who was at a short cover. In the second innings, he picked out Tim Southey, who took the catch there, and he got out to Glenn Phillips for 3. In terms of that, you know, dismissal, you know, didn't really look good on the screen in terms of when we saw it live. So for him, he will need to look back and say, yeah, I could have done better. That was a poor dismissal, and I could have batted better across the 2 innings. So definitely they'll definitely ponder about that, Head, Marsh, and Carey. In terms of Australia's batting, the second innings, they were bowled out for 164. They got a lead of 204 runs, which helped them. But Australia should have posted at least 400 in the second innings. They could have been a little bit more ruthless in the second innings, look to, take the game away from New Zealand, essentially. But in the end, 369 was enough. They had a 204-run head start, and that helps when you have 204 runs on the board already, when you're batting in the third innings of the test match to try and set it up. But they could have been a lot better. I think Australia went a little bit too aggressive. They had plenty of time left in the test match to really build a very good, dominant lead. But in the end, 369 was enough. That's something they'll talk about going into Christchurch. How can we better improve our second innings batting if we're batting first and try to set up a target? How can we do that better? There's still plenty of room for improvement, but it's not quite firing. But I think the positives from Australia in this test match is definitely Cameron Green. They'll be delighted to see that he was able to score a big century. Hopefully for him, he can build off this 174 not out. So I think that's the main positive from Australia in terms of the batting. The top order still needs work, and the middle order needs to, really look to apply themselves a bit better. But apart from that, they did enough to get the job done in the end, and that's all that matters. If you do enough to get the job done and get the victory, I think you'll be pretty happy about that. So that's the batting for Australia. Let's talk about the bowling quickly, and how the bowlers performed across this first test match. Very good. Very good. The Australian bowlers showing why they're the best in the world. Stark, Cummins, Lyon and Hazlewood, just showing everyone why they're the best quartet going around in world cricket in terms of this bowling attack. Pretty much when you bowl New Zealand out under 200 in both innings, I think that's a really good result, and they'll be very pleased with that. They used the conditions well, and Nathan Lyon was outstanding. 10 wickets for the match, just showing his class, especially in the second innings when the ball was turning. 6 wickets is a phenomenal effort. It just shows how good Nathan Lyon is, and goes underneath the radar. Nathan Lyon, he's sort of underrated at times. He just does his job when the team requires him to do that. So he bowled really well. The Australian quicks all took a wicket, took a wicket each in this test match. Didn't really have a big contribution, Stark, Cummins and Hazlewood, but they did pick up wickets here and there. Mitchell Marsh chipped in with a wicket or two. Travis Head, part-time off-spin, picked up a wicket. Cameron Green as well in the second innings. So the Australian bowlers would be happy with their performance. I think they'll be very happy with the way they went about things against New Zealand, bowled them out for under 200 in both innings. I think that's a pretty good day at the office. So nothing more to add, really. It was a very clinical, dominant display with the ball from the Australian bowlers, and plenty of confidence going into the second test, that's for sure. To finish up about Australia, overall, I think they'll be very happy with the result. It's good to get a win on the board. They'll be looking at certain areas to improve on, especially with the batting, in terms of the top order, the second innings batting as well. A few batters will be hoping for better results in Christchurch. But other than that, the bowling was pretty good, and it was a pretty dominant performance Australia had over New Zealand. So I think they'll be very happy, I should say. Plenty of confidence going into the second test in Christchurch. So that's Australia in terms of their performance across this test match with bat and ball. Let's now preview the second test match of the series. The second test match of the series of this New Zealand-Australia test series will be played at the Hagley Oval, which is in Christchurch. It's one of the new venues in Christchurch. It's been hosting test matches for a few years now. Obviously, the main venue in Christchurch, as we know, Old Lancaster Park, used to be one of the old venues in Christchurch, but since the earthquakes happened back in 2011, that was pretty much damaged by the earthquakes, had to be demolished, and Hagley Oval has now taken over as the main cricket venue in Christchurch. Now, it's a wonderful ground in the parks there in Christchurch, and it's going to be playing host to the second test match of this series, the second and final test match of this Trans-Tasman series between New Zealand and Australia. So first of all, let's have a look at the stats between New Zealand and Australia here in Hagley Oval in Christchurch. Well, pretty much they played one test match, and that was back in the 2016 tour, where Australia won that series 2-0. They played here in Christchurch. Australia won that test match. So the head-to-head record, Australia 1, New Zealand 0. And that's the stats between Australia and New Zealand when it comes to test matches at the Hagley Oval in Christchurch. Now, I did mention last time, back in 2016, in the corresponding test match in that series, Australia won that test match by, 7 wickets in the end. The test match is best remembered for Brendan McCullum playing his 100th consecutive test match and making the fastest ever century in test cricket history. He made 145 from 79 balls. New Zealand made 370 batting first. Australia in reply made 505 all out. Joe Burns top scored with 170. Steve Smith got 138. Adam Verges got 60-odd. New Zealand made 335 in their innings. In their second innings, Kane Williamson top scored with 97. And Australia, in the end, chased down the target of 201 runs to finish 3 for 201. Joe Burns top scored with 65. Steve Smith, 53, not out in that run chase. And Australia won the test match by 7 wickets here in Christchurch back in 2016. So that's the last time that the teams played a test match here in Christchurch, and that's what happened in the test match. So could be a similar result this time around in 2024. Now, in terms of the potential 11s for both teams, let's talk about that in terms of the selection, who will face the chop and who will be selected for this second and final test match of this series. Now, we'll start with the home side, New Zealand, and we'll talk about New Zealand and talk about their selection conundrums and problems that they have. Now, New Zealand, they will definitely make a change to the 11 because Will O'Rourke, the fast bowler, picked up a hamstring injury. So he's been ruled out of this second test. And New Zealand have called up fast bowler Ben Sears. And he's in line to potentially make his test debut for New Zealand. So you would think Ben Sears would come into the 11 for Will O'Rourke. In terms of the Mitchell Satner situation, not picking a specialist spinner, after what Glenn Phillips did, taking 5 wickets in this test match, I think New Zealand would be pretty happy to leave Phillips in as the main spinner. They've also got Rachin Ravinder as well, who bowled a few overs in this first test match. But you would think after what Phillips did, I don't think New Zealand will probably go with Satner. So I think New Zealand, in terms of their changes, only one change. I think Ben Sears will come in for Will O'Rourke. Obviously, a lot of people, especially New Zealand fans, will want the selectors to change the batting lineup, given what happened in this first test match with the batting. I don't think they'll do that. New Zealand don't have any other batters who they can call into the squad. I'm not sure if Henry Nichols is a part of the squad now, but he's been out of the side for a while. I don't think New Zealand will make wholesale changes to the batting. I think they'll just replace Will O'Rourke with Ben Sears, and I think that's the only change. So the potential 11 for New Zealand for the second test could be Latham, Young, Williamson, Ravinder, Mitchell, Blundell, Phillips, Kugelin, Henry, Southey, and Sears. In terms of the Australian 11, well, pretty much that's going to be the same 11, really. I don't think we need to talk about Australia's 11 all that much. It's going to be pretty much the status quo, same 11 as it was for the first test. So their potential 11 for the second test, Australia, Smith, Khawaja, Labuschagne, Green, Head, Mitchell Marsh, Carey, Stark, Cummins, Lyon, and Hazelwood. In terms of who's going to go on and win this test match, after what we saw in the first test match, you would think Australia should win this second test here in Christchurch. For New Zealand, definitely an uphill battle, definitely a big challenge for them in terms of how do we prevent a 2-0 series defeat. It's going to be tough work for New Zealand to try and bounce back after the loss in the first test match. Australia got confidence. They're a good side. New Zealand, can they overcome? Do they believe? That's the simple thing. Do New Zealand believe that they can win? That's the question. At the moment, they don't believe they can win against Australia, and that's why Australia are being dominant. So you would think, judging what we saw from the first test, you would think Australia should go on and win this test and win the series 2-0, as it was predicted at the start of the series anyway. So I think Australia to win, this second test match in Christchurch, as they did back in 2016. So that's the second test preview done and dusted. And my concluding thoughts, my final thoughts from the first test match, from what I observed and took out of the test match. A pretty convincing victory by Australia. 172 runs is a pretty convincing victory, which saw them retain the Trans-Tasman Trophy in the process. Cameron Green's innings was outstanding. Nathan Lyon showed his class with the ball. And Australia too strong in the end. For New Zealand, they were rue missed opportunities. Poor tactics and poor batting cost them dearly. Plenty of work for the home side to do to avoid a 2-0 series defeat. But overall, it was a pretty interesting test match. I think at times we saw some entertaining cricket. At times we saw some very substandard poor batting from both sides, that is. Not only New Zealand, but Australia as well. The bowling was good at times as well. We saw some 5-wicket hauls, obviously, from Henry and Phillips and Lyon. So that was good to see. So, yeah, it was a pretty entertaining test match throughout the 4 days. And hopefully we see much of the same in the second test in Christchurch to end the series for this series between New Zealand and Australia. Well, thanks everyone for listening to our first test review between New Zealand and Australia. If you're watching or listening to this episode of the podcast on our YouTube channel, let us know your thoughts on this first test between New Zealand and Australia in the comments. We would love to hear what you have to say. Thanks for watching and listening. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.